Welcome back everyone. Let's go and take a look at the Samsung Galaxy S4 and see how this phone holds up in 2022. Now what I will definitely tell you is this phone is really not worth it in most ways nowadays, but it's still very interesting to look back at. I mean, this was a flagship in 2013. They didn't really have like an S4 Plus or even an S4 Edge. This was their main flagship. They had their Note lineup, but this was the phone that many people looked at as the cream of the crop of what Samsung had to offer. Now, the year before, they had the Samsung Galaxy S3, and that was a beast of a domination of just Android phones. Samsung sold a ton of those things. With the Galaxy S4, this was also a pretty popular device as well. Now, if you want to pick up some other phones I would recommend this year, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside of the Galaxy S4, on the front, we did have a 5-inch Super AMOLED display, and it was a 1080p panel. Now, this was a decent panel of that day and age. We did have a little bit of bezel on the top and bottom, but back then, this was actually pretty good design. You have to remember the Galaxy S3, to be honest, it didn't really age too well. I don't think it looks like a super premium phone anymore, but the Galaxy S4 with the design of this phone and how it holds up right now, it actually is a pretty decent performing phone in terms of the looks, and I'm actually pretty happy with the way Samsung kind of made this phone. They slimmed down the bezels on the side, they made it look more professional, and it looks a lot leaner of a device than the previous generation, or even the Galaxy S5 to be honest. Now this is a full HD panel, pretty much the same resolution that we have nowadays on the Galaxy S22, but we do have 120Hz where this one was like 60Hz I believe. We had the home button on the front, no fingerprint sensor there, capacitive keys on the side, and that was it on the front. Now we did have the micro USB port on the bottom of this thing, which still is okay, but again, compared to the I/O that we have nowadays with the USB Type-C port, I would definitely prefer USB-C over this port. We also had a headphone jack on this phone, but when we flip it over to the back of this device, and this is where things get extremely interesting, we actually had a full-on removable back from this phone. So we could actually go ahead, pop off the back of this device, which that in and of itself was actually really awesome, but also we could remove the battery as well as put in a microSD card slot on this device. That is something that a lot of phones do not have nowadays, and in my opinion, I actually went and I used the Galaxy S4, I think it must have been back in 2015, late 2015 or early, something like that, and I actually went ahead and bought this thing, I custom ROM'd it, and I was thinking to myself, as long as this phone's still getting software support through custom ROMs, this phone could theoretically last forever. You could just keep popping in and out batteries, you could put in a bigger battery if you want to, and I just kept thinking back to that removable battery because of this phone. It was awesome, I love it, I miss removable batteries, but I especially miss microSD card slots. No phones nowadays have it. It makes sense why developers don't put it in, but still it would have been really nice had we had it, and we don't really have it here. Now we do have a single camera setup on the back, no glass back, but that plastic back I love being able to pop off, and that kind of covers it up on the outside. On top of that, no IP certification, no wireless charging, no nothing like that, but still I am a fan of the way this phone looks, and I think it's definitely good for the most part. Now flipping it over for the cameras, I will definitely tell you, now back in 2013 when this phone first came out, I'm sure this was probably one of the better cameras of that year. Nowadays obviously it doesn't hold up too well, but one thing I've always said is that Samsung threw a lot of stuff they had at their time into these phones. So if there was a software feature, there was a camera thing they could think of, they just threw everything at these phones at one time, and they were just like, here, hopefully you guys can enjoy these features. Since then they've definitely slimmed down the amount of features, and I will say the whole entire UI, I mean, TouchWiz isn't really my cup of tea. I don't think really too many people like it, but you do have to factor in the fact that Samsung did a really good job at this camera. The 13 megapixel camera on the back really wasn't that bad, and the 2 megapixel front camera, again, it's bad nowadays, but back in 2013, about 9 years ago, I'm sure it was much better. Its main competitor at this time was probably the iPhone 4S and the iPhone. The main competitor of this time was probably the iPhone 5 and the iPhone 5S. The 5S came out this year a little bit later, so again, you're kind of competing with those things. So it's in line with those cameras to be able to compete with. Again, I don't think the Galaxy S4 is a phone I would recommend buying nowadays, but I do think the camera isn't its, worst thing about it. I think there's definitely aspects of this phone that I would not recommend even thinking about buying this phone, and the camera is definitely one of them, to be honest, nowadays. But again, back in 2013, I'm sure it wasn't that bad. Apps like Snapchat and Instagram, those apps back then, I'm sure they were tailored to these specific phones. Nowadays, they're more tailored to the iPhone 13s and the Galaxy S22s. But again, at this time, I'm sure this was a decent phone in terms of camera. So in terms of that, that's all I'm going to say there. In terms of software, this phone did end off with Android Lollipop. So again, this was many years ago. This phone completely ended off on that version. So it's been many years. I mean, we're on Android, whatever, like 12. We got the Android 13 betas now. So this phone, when it comes down to it, is severely outdated in that standpoint, but it's kind of expected. And I kind of want to say it's okay. It's expected as of this point for this thing to be severely outdated. So that's kind of how I would sum up that side of things. I will say, being able to custom ROM it like I did have a much better experience with this thing after I custom ROMmed it. I was on pretty much stock Android, and it was an amazing experience, and I was so happy I did that. And that was by far probably one of the best things about it. In my opinion, this is something I always look forward to. And I mean, I look at a phone like the Galaxy S4. These are prime phones to go ahead and actually custom ROM. If you're still using them, there's no reason to still be on Android Lollipop anymore. It makes way more sense to be on one of the more recent versions of Androids. And if you're going to pick up a phone like this, it just makes sense to custom ROM it, and that's kind of how I'd sum it up there. Now, in terms of performance, again, I mean, we got to kind of look at it one by one. This device has that Exynos 5410 octa chipset, an octa-core CPU with 2GB of RAM on all the models that this phone came out with. And like I mentioned before, I mean, this thing, it was a good performing phone, I'm sure, when it came out. And there was a reason why I kind of switched to it temporarily in 2015. I mean, I was doing reviews, or I was reading reviews about this phone and how it held up at that time. There weren't really too many, to be honest. And it seemed like it was a decent phone. I liked being able to remove the battery and everything. But when I custom ROM this thing, and when I actually went ahead and used it then, it was a night and day difference from TouchWiz to custom ROM. It was a much better performing phone. And funny enough, one of my first reviews I've ever done on this channel was actually of the Galaxy S4. And I talked about then, and I still feel the same way now, this phone, more than the performance and it being a little laggy on TouchWiz, this phone would heat up like crazy. I've never had a phone in my life that would heat up as much as this phone. And so many years later, I'm still talking about it because it was so prevalent. I've seen many reviews talk about it. I've seen many people on Reddit talk about it in just the comment section in general. And I'm going to be honest, when you have a phone like the Galaxy S4, it is just a phone that heats up like no other. I'm not really too sure why. It was just one of those things that just kept happening with this phone. So again, that's kind of a thing to keep in mind. If you're planning on buying something like a Galaxy S4, it is going to give you quite a bit of a choppy experience just in terms of just it overheating, let alone if you're trying to play games on this thing that are still supported. If you're trying to go and use it for any emulations or anything, this is not going to be a phone I would recommend going down in that direction, or really any phone that had this chipset or the internals, especially compared to phones nowadays. I mean, the base model of the S22s now have 8GB of RAM, 4 times the amount of the RAM of the Galaxy S4. So that is definitely saying something. So even though this phone in some ways it might still be worth it, I really don't think anybody's going to be looking at the Galaxy S4 as a phone to buy. So that's why I would kind of set this phone in terms of kind of like a novelty, or maybe more of like a collector's item now, rather than having a phone that you're going to use unless you're willing to custom ROM it. If you're willing to custom ROM it and kind of modify it there, then by all means go for it. But to actually use it makes absolutely no sense in my opinion. But one of the best things that I kind of do wish that most phones would bring back nowadays is that removable battery, that 2600 mAh battery inside of this thing stock, where you can go ahead and upgrade this thing to a much bigger size battery if you wanted to. So that was another thing that I really liked about, Samsung of doing in this specific route. So I would definitely tell you right now, probably wouldn't be the first one I would recommend, but I definitely do think that with something like the Galaxy S4 right now, it's definitely not worth it in the battery standpoint. And that's kind of how I would sum up this whole entire video. I think the Galaxy S4 was a great phone when it came out. It's had its issues, but this is one of the phones that I used, even though it was probably for like a week or two. I custom ROMmed it and I felt like I had a good experience. I would not recommend buying this phone anymore, but if you want to, buy it and custom ROM it, then go for it. Other than that, I probably wouldn't recommend buying it, but it's still an important phone that Samsung made in my opinion. So that kind of covers it up. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.